Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the QuickBooks Desktop Migration Mastering Online Banking class. My name is Erica Otero, and I'm going to be your instructor for the next hour. So don't want to miss any moment of this hour. We have a lot to fit in, so I want to just go ahead and hop in. Now let's go into talking about what we're going to be covering in today's class. So about 55 minutes left together. So there is quite a bit that we're going to cover in this time frame. So to kind of give you an idea of what to expect, we're going to be mainly focusing on a deep dive into online banking. I have a company file set up, ready to go, and I'm going to show you guys from start to end what it looks like to connect your accounts in QBO for the first time, whether you're having to do a connection or upload your transactions. We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about how to actually categorize your transactions, what it means to categorize, taking action, what the online banking center even is, and how it works. So just a really good, thorough explanation of the ins and outs of how to connect and then use your online banking center. We're then going to go through a reconciliation process. So I want you to have reconciliation experience before you actually jump in to kind of see what it looks like. So we're going to make sure that you have confidence in your reporting and confidence in your transactions. So I'm going to take you through reconciling after we clear out the online banking center. I'm also going to show you guys how to close your books, what that means and how to do it in QuickBooks Online. Basically, what it allows us to do is protect and sometimes even password protect our transactions that we spend all of our time and hard work entering into the software. Closing our books gives us kind of like a lock that we can place on changes to transactions that we've already reconciled. Some might even use this for whenever we file taxes. So I'll show you guys how to close your books. And then I'm also going to show you guys how to use the account register. And the reason why we'll do that is because you can use it when it comes time to actually working your online banking center, as well as whenever you're doing reconciliation. You can use your register to actually search for transactions, check their status, if they're reconciled or not, or make any adjustments from the register. So I'll have some notes about that as well. Now, one of the most common, and plus we do answer your questions, so feel free to submit those in. Now, a common question about this class is, well, this class is ideally about reconciling, but why are we talking about online banking so much first? Well, this class in particular is about mastering that online banking center. And by doing that, you're going to be setting yourself up for success when it comes to reconciliation. To reconcile, you must first have accurate records of your transactions. And online banking is the best way to do so because it's an automatic connection. It brings in your transactions as they happen, and then you can then categorize them and bring them into your books without having to go to the new menu and manually record each one of your expenses and input all the details manually. So that's always been the bulk of the class, talking about mastering the online banking center. And then towards the end, we will do a reconciliation, and I'll show you what it looks like to actually reconcile in QBO. Now I'm going to switch over to my QBO, and this is my accounts. We are Craig's Design and Landscaping today. This is my dashboard, but I am going to switch over into my banking center. Now, before we actually jump into all of this, I want to explain what reconciliation is. And so your account reconciliation, of course, whether we've done this in desktop before, maybe we haven't, or just kind of get an idea of what it is in QuickBooks Online. It's the process of matching our transactions into QuickBooks Online against what our bank or credit card statement says. So this review, again, should be done on a regular basis, once a month, just like you would in desktop, or at the very least, whenever you receive your statements. The process itself can be done fairly quickly if you connect your online bank accounts in QBO and then do regular upkeep throughout the month. That will make it a lot easier for you to actually to stay on top of reconciliation, but also getting used to the banking center. Now, one thing I do like to note when it comes into us getting into the actual software, so let me make sure my share is not paused. But as you see that we are in my online banking. Now, sometimes this view can be a little bit different. So I want to pause really quick and talk about the views that are available in QBO. That way you can make sure that not only does your view look like mine, but in my opinion, I prefer the view I'm going to show you to actually work your banking center. So in QuickBooks Online, we have the accountant view and we have the business view. And you can check which view you are in by opening up your gear menu. And I'm probably going to just cut my camera for now because I do hide some of the features here. But you can open up our gear menu in the top right-hand side. And along the bottom, you're going to see it says you're viewing QuickBooks in Accountant View. On the right-hand side, it says switch to Business View. Now, when you guys set up your QBO account, whether you are moving your data directly from desktop into QuickBooks Online, or maybe you went straight to QuickBooks Online, signed up for your new account, and now you're migrating, or you signed up for the new account, and you're just starting from scratch, you had desktop prior. This absolutely is something that is dependent. The view that you automatically go into will depend on the questions that you answer during your setup, but you can switch back and forth as needed. What I mean by that is when I set up my account, I answered that I was the bookkeeper or the accountant. So it automatically throws me into the accountant view. Accountant view is going to use more of your more common accounting terms, a lot more specific jargon that maybe we're more used to if we have some kind of accounting background. The business view happens if we answer that we're the business owner. And so it uses less of our accounting jargon and more simple or easier to understand terms. If we're not able to see, I can start the new share. I saw a couple of comments saying that we couldn't see, which I can change that. Looks like we can see it now. Okay. So I went up to my gear menu. If you didn't see what was happening there, I think the share was just being a little weird, but I went over here into my gear menu and I'm just looking right here. So accountant view versus the business view. So basically what just happens is that if I'm in the business view, it just means that I probably answered that I was the business owner whenever I signed up for my account or answered one of these, and I could be in the business view. Business view is going to look a lot different than the view that I'm going to be using today, which is the accountant view. So I recommend starting off in the accountant view, or to more understand this class, that's the view that I am going to be in. I just like to point that out before we actually jump into the content. That I am in the accountant view. That's all we've covered so far. So I'm going to switch back over to the banking center. Now, online banking is one of the biggest advantages of using online. You may have used bank feeds in desktop, but maybe some of us have not used them there. Maybe we do a lot of this manually. Maybe we've never seen the bank feeds. Maybe we've heard about online banking feeds, but this is honestly, one of my favorite features when it works in our favor in terms of understanding it. But this is one of my favorite features once you get the hang of it, to bring in our transactions rather than having to record everything manually. Using online banking in QBO is more readily available than you may be used to in desktop, which is another perk. You don't have to download the transactions for each account, as it actually feeds these in automatically. It's a direct connection to your bank account. But one thing you cannot do is make bank transactions from QBO to your bank, meaning that we cannot pay our bills from banking. You would need to initiate those outside of the account or use a built-in feature that Intuit integrates into their billing called Melio, and you'll see that when you start entering in bills. Now let's talk a little bit more about what this banking center is, how it works, and why that way we can understand what it means to actually use it. So the online banking center, when you first come into here, it's going to ask you if you want to connect or upload your transactions. So I have uploaded transactions for these two, but what we normally would do is actually link our account. When we link our account, we can come into here and we can tell QuickBooks what is the name of our financial institution. I can select the account that I have my business bank account with, and it's going to take me to a special login, secured login at that. You see it right here, where I can enter in the email and the password of the bank account that I use to manage my business. Once I do that and I accept, I can select the date that I want to actually bring my transactions in for. And we'll talk about that as far as the dates in just a moment. But I can select the date that I want to go back to, connect my account. And once I do that, it's going to create this box. And if I link my account, QuickBooks is going to automatically download the transactions into my account as they happen. Again, that's the big benefit of using this, is that it's an automatic connection. Once those transactions get downloaded into here in the banking center, we want to view this as more of a waiting room. Our transactions are waiting in the online banking center for us to tell it what to do with it. They aren't affecting our reports or on our registers just yet. They come into our center so we can take action on the individual transactions that get downloaded. If for some reason you have issues linking your bank account, or it's an account, or it's a financial institution that's not supported, which many of them are, but if for some reason you have issues, what you can also do is upload transactions. This is a more manual way to do it, but it is still a lot quicker than entering in all of your transactions one by one. So if you want to upload transactions, you can actually upload them from a file. So I'm going to add one more account to mine. So basically you would come into here and you can manually upload your transactions in any of these formats listed right here. If I want to, I can go ahead and open up my file, and I'm going to go ahead and actually let me double check which one did I need to connect. Let me double check my credit card account. Perfect. So I'm going to upload from file. I'm going to go look for that file. And I'm going to plug in my MasterCard. So this is a .qbo file, which meets the requirement. I'm going to hit continue. And then QuickBooks is going to ask me which account on my chart of accounts do I want to associate these transactions with. And in this case, I'm going to choose my MasterCard that I already have set up right here. Once I choose the account that these transactions go with, it is a different account from the ones I already have here. So it has created its own little box as well, which is really, I'm just going to exit out of some of these little things that are popping up so we can keep focused on the main account. So now I have 3 accounts connected or uploaded here. So I have a Chase checking, savings, and a MasterCard. So each of these can be clicked on, and this is how I can open up the transactions associated with it. Or you see this drop down right here. And if I have a lot of accounts, I can scroll through this here or reorder them here as well. Now let's talk about the balances that we see within these boxes. So we see a bank balance and an in QuickBooks balance, and then we have a number in the bottom right. The bank balance is the real world balance. There might be bank transactions that happen outside of QuickBooks that QuickBooks doesn't know about just yet. So we're going to see a bank balance. This is the real life balance, while the in QuickBooks balance is the balance according to the register in QuickBooks. So this is the transactions we currently have in QuickBooks, and that's what we say the balance is here. Now notice that these balances are different right now, and that could be for a number of reasons. It could be outstanding transactions, new transactions for a connected account, could be duplicates, edited or deleted transactions. It could be a card account. It could be a couple of different things. It's not always a cause for concern, but duplicates tends to be the culprit of us having such a difference. But as you start to work your transactions and reconcile and clean up the books, your balances will get closer and closer. Some businesses, they can get them to match what's currently going on. Some businesses will not be able to because there's always things happening. So it just depends. Now, the bottom number right here on the right-hand side is the number of transactions that are in this account to be reviewed. So there's 21 transactions here for review. There are 6 here, and there is just 1 here in the savings. So that's what that number is for. That's a little bit about those. Now let's talk about what we can actually do once we get connected. Now, if we have any issues once we get the account linked or the transaction uploaded, if for any reason I need to disconnect this account from QBO, it could be that I closed it, things of that sort. I can always edit the connection by clicking this little pencil. You'll see right here when you go in and you click on that actual account, a little pencil pops up. And I can click that pencil and it's going to say edit account info. So once I open that window, there is going to be a little button right here that says disconnect this account on save. So if I want to disconnect account from my online banking, that's all I need to check off. And whenever I save and close it, it disconnects this account from my bank. It doesn't delete it from my chart of accounts, but it will disconnect the connection. So that doesn't download transactions anymore. And so sometimes that could be used to disconnect and reconnect if you ever have any issues downloading your bank transactions. Now, switching from desktop to online, you will need to reconnect your bank accounts. It will not move over that connection. Another thing that you'll notice sometimes when you bring in transactions from your transition from desktop to online is sometimes we have seen duplicates come into the banking center after making that switch. So I'm going to show you later on how to exclude transactions towards the end of class. That if you ever get duplicates or things that you already have on your register, we have a way to exclude it, and we'll go into all of that. So focusing on our checking account, let's talk about what happens then once the transactions come into our account. So once they are in here, then they come into the for review. Once they get downloaded, you'll see them under for review. We'll talk about categorized and excluded in just a moment. So there are 21 transactions down here. And then we have a search box and a couple of filters that we'll go into as well. Now, scrolling down to the bulk of this window is going to be the actual transactions. So each of these are actually different transactions. So each of these lines are different transactions that have been downloaded into the banking center. I can click on them and open them up to see a little bit more information, but essentially each of these are downloaded transactions. Once connected, transactions will be in one of these statuses, or you can take one of these actions on these transactions. But on this right-hand side, you'll see this action column. You're either going to see adds, transfers, matches, and sometimes down here, you're going to see what are called views. An add action that you can take on a transaction means that this is a brand new transaction that has not been previously recorded into QuickBooks. When a transaction gets downloaded into QuickBooks, QuickBooks searches our records to see, do we already have something that is like this transaction? It searches by the dollar amount and that date. If it can't find anything, which means that we have not added it manually from the new menu, it means that I need to add some additional information before I can add it to my books. You're also going to see matches, and this is a match right here. You see this line 4 for Ron's Barbecue Smokehouse. If I click on this, a little bit different. A match transaction is one that has been entered manually from the new menu, and it has been downloaded from the bank. So as you see here, there was a check that QuickBooks found that equaled the same amount that the downloaded transaction came in for. So it wants us to match these together. It will not be counted twice. It merely links them, just saying, yep, this is downloaded and this was already recorded. You're also going to see a transfer option. So transfers happen whenever you are simply moving money between accounts. So from checking to savings and so on and so forth. This is not used whenever you are paying off a credit card. I will show you an example of that later on. This is strictly used anytime we are moving money from one account to the other. That's a transfer. And so I'm going to talk about the view status in just a second, but I wanted to show you what it looks like to do this match. So again, we talked about matching. The goal of matching is to find a match between our QuickBooks and the real world, aka the bank transactions. So the downloaded transactions are the real world, and the match that QuickBooks finds is what we manually entered in. So we recorded this check, and QuickBooks found it because this was a expense for $15.85. And this looks the same, and the date is the same, 1/15. This bank detail is what QuickBooks uses to search your transactions for keywords. It's not always 100% accurate, but in this case, it worked out perfectly. I take a look and I'm like, yes, that is okay. So I'm actually going to take action on our first transaction. I'm going to select match on this. And what this tells QuickBooks is that the check that I manually recorded from the new menu whenever I made this expense matches that downloaded transaction that came into our banking center. Once I select match, that transaction is now on my register. It is actually affecting my balance. And we see that it also has left the banking center. This number dropped down to 20 from 21. Once you take action on a transaction and it is on your register, you are free to manage that in our regular ways, meaning that I can go to the register and I can see that there. So within QuickBooks Online Banking, I can actually find all of the transactions that I've taken action on right here under where it says categorized. So for review is still waiting. Categorized means that it was actually completed. So if I click on the categorized tab, you're going to see that exact transaction that we just matched right here. And this is helpful in case you need to make changes or undo the action that we took on it. It'll pop it back over there under our full review section. So that's the match status. And so there is another status that kind of goes hand in hand with it. And if I scroll down here just a little bit, we're going to see this view status. The view status is very similar to the match transaction option, because what this just means is that it found more than one match that could possibly be it. And it wants us to view them before we match it. So it found two matches for this $350 expense for Pam seats. So I look at this and I see, okay, so we have two transactions, one for the 8th and one for the 20th. This real world transaction came in for the 10th. So more than likely, and you will see this happen, that our dates that we put on our manual transactions could be a day or two within what the downloaded transaction actually says. So what I basically do is pick the one that is supposed to be associated with it. So this is my manual check, and according to the real world, it goes with this one. So I select this one and then I match that. And it's going to match it with the proper one. That other transaction is still in QuickBooks, but when its associated transaction comes in, I can still match it later on. It just wants me to view, and I pick the one that is accurate. Now, one thing I'm going to do to kind of rearrange this a little bit, because those matches are kind of self-explanatory. It just means that we already recorded it. So you can actually reorder your columns in this online banking center as well. If this is kind of a little bit jumbled, I want to bring all of my matches to the top so that we can focus on some of the other actions. So I'm going to click on my category or match tab and notice how it brought all of my matches to the top. You can do that with these columns as well. So if you want to reorganize it by date, you can click the date column, etc. So we're going to come back to all of these matches in just a little bit. Let's actually focus our attention down here to where all of these ads are at. So we talked about matching transactions and where these transactions go once we take action on them. Let's talk about adding. So adding, again, are new things that we have not recorded in QuickBooks yet. And they are going to come into here and show up as an ad. And so again, whenever we look at these transactions, we need to add additional information. So I'm going to pop one of these open. For example, this rent transaction that came in for $1,200. We want to double check because QuickBooks is going to do its best to try to suggest the details of these transactions based off of the bank detail down here. So you see A1 backhoe rental, but also QuickBooks tries to learn about how the company spends and receives money. So whenever we look at this, we see that, okay, we're missing quite a bit of information from our transactions. If we think to the pieces of information that are required from the new menu to enter in an expense, I normally enter in the who of the transaction, which is the vendor or the customer, the what of the transaction, which is what we purchased or what we sold. In this case, it's an expense, so it's the category. The date, so the when of the transaction, so that's right here, and then the how much, which is the amount. So the who, the when, the what, and the how much. Same thing applies here. We want to look to see what is missing from this transaction. So I look at my real world records and I see that, okay, I actually had a couple of equipment rentals that I made with A1 backhoe rental, and these are the transactions coming into QuickBooks. So let's fill this out. Let's fill in our missing pieces. So we can see what's missing here. We're missing a vendor. We also want to double check this category because just because a category comes in here does not necessarily mean it's the one. It means QuickBooks is guessing. So in this case, I look at my receipts and I'm like, yes, I went to a vendor called A1 Backhoe Rental and I made an equipment rental purchase from them. So if I go into here and I start typing, I see that, okay, A1 Backhoe Rental is not currently one of my vendors. I can set them up from this window. So I can go right here where it says add, and I can add A1 backhoe rental as a new vendor from right here in the online banking center. I don't have to leave and go to my list. So I save that, and now A1 backhoe rental is a vendor, and I can use it to track. According to my receipts, though, this wasn't a rent expense. This was me renting equipment from them. So we always want to double check that our category is the same because QuickBooks is going to take the best guess on the category or why you spent money. And in this case, it's actually equipment rental. So I'm going to go ahead and select my equipment rental expense account. If I'm using classes, that will also be available here. If I'm using projects or associating this with a particular customer, I can do that here. I can still even mark things as billable from right here. So it's basically like I'm filling out the transaction from banking rather than the new menu. So I have a memo field. I can add attachments like normal. All of that stuff is still available here, which is really nice. Once I add all the details, in this case, I'm telling QuickBooks I spent money on equipment rental. I can add this transaction now. So that transaction has been categorized. It didn't already have a match, but I added it in. So when I go over to categorize, we're going to find that one here as well. So I added that one in. It just means that there wasn't already a match to link it to. And so one thing I will also point out, notice how now this transaction shows up in green, and it is also A1 backhoe rental. What this means is that it has been recognized or categorized, quote unquote, since we tend to spend money the same way with the same vendors. QuickBooks will easily recognize that, especially when it comes to things like Amazon or anything of that sort. And so if it ever needs to get changed, you can change it, but notice how it automatically plugged in the vendor because we previously did not have A1 backhoe rental even as a vendor, but it recognized that this was also money out. And we know this is money out by looking up here just to point out the spent column versus the received column. So spent is money out, received is money in, usually deposits or payments, refunds, things of that sort. And that's how I know that this is money out. This is another transaction for $800 to A1 Badco Rental as well. According to my records, that's beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add. So that adds that one as well. Now notice that QuickBooks is going to ask us, do we want to create a rule? It just noticed that we added 2 expense transactions for the same customer with the same category or the equipment rental expense account. So it's going to ask us, hey, do you want to create a rule so that any of these similar transactions that come in automatically get these updated? And you can choose to do that. You can choose the payee you want QuickBooks to apply, and then I could edit the rule to apply the equipment rental account automatically. Auto add means it's going to automatically add the transactions as soon as they come in, which means it doesn't need to have any intervention before it hits your register. Tread carefully with auto add. I usually recommend keeping auto add off until you trust that the rule is actually applying the accounts correctly. And if that's the case, then go ahead and flip on auto add at a later time. I'll go ahead and create this rule just so I can show you what that looks like. What it basically means, and I can manage this from up here from rules or on my banking center, we'll see rules here. It just means that anytime a transaction comes in that has the A1 backhoe rental, like we saw with the other ones, it's going to set it up as an expense, apply equipment rental and the payee automatically. So it's another way to further your automation in QuickBooks Online Banking. But I would say in the beginning, might as well just get used to using it manually first, and then later on figure out what rules can actually help you. I'm going to reorganize my category one more time here, just bringing my matches to the top so we can continue on. Now, before I move on to our next example, we'll notice there is one more A1 backhoe rental transaction in here, but it didn't turn green and nothing changed other than it plugged in the vendor for us. Whenever I click on the downloaded transaction and open it up, it did plug in the vendor, but this is uncategorized income. Well, if we look at our columns here, this second to last column is money in. So this was money that we got back from A1 Backhoe Rental, while the other 2 transactions were the actual rental purchases. So I look at my documentation and I say, oh, okay, yes, we did have to put up a $200 deposit. And whenever we returned the equipment, they gave that back to us. It was a part of the previous expenses that we made. So they gave us $200 back. Well, this is how you can actually record your refunds back from your vendors in a nice and easy way. I'm firstly going to go ahead. I'm going to right click on my report center to open this link in a new tab. This is one tip I like to point out to desktop migrators because a lot of us are used to having multiple windows open in QuickBooks Desktop. So if you want to view multiple parts of online at once, you just want to open it in a new tab. So right clicking on that and selecting open link in a new tab will open that up into a new section. So now I can flip back and forth. So on this tab, I'm going to pop open my profit and loss report. And the reason why is because I want to show you those 2 equipment rental transactions that I just brought in before we bring in the $200. So bear with me, I'm going to scroll over here and you see this equipment rental expense account. On your profit and loss reports, you can click the summarized total here, and that's going to actually open up our transactions that make up this balance. And one thing that you'll see here is here we're going to see the $1,200 that I brought in just a moment ago and the $800. So the 800's right here, and then we have the 1,200 right there. Those are the 2 expenses that we had to A1 backhoe rental. So I'll keep this tab open. And I'm going to flip back to my online banking center, back to this $200 deposit that we received back. The reason why this one didn't get changed automatically is because it was money coming back in. QuickBooks thinks of this as income, but this is actually a refund. So I need to think, okay, so if I spent money on equipment rentals and I got some of that money back, I'm actually, yes, going to want to use that same exact expense account rather than an income account. It wasn't a sale. It was merely a deposit refund. So I'm going to use that same account so I can accurately report how much money I have spent on my equipment rental. So once I hit add on the equipment rental transaction, because it was money back in, I'm going to refresh this page and we use the same account. So we'll see this $200 now come in. But now I see this as a minus 200. So it's actually going to take away $200 because I spent $200 less on equipment rental once I got back this refund. So that is the easiest way to bring in your vendor refunds is to just point it back to the same account where the original funds came from. And that's exactly what we did with this one. Now I'm going to keep going with a couple of more examples of different transaction categorizations that you could have. Let's say you get into your online banking center for the first time and you realize, for example, I have a charge here with Chin's Gas and Oil, and this is for $185 at a gas station. Now, I know gas around the country is pushing about $5 a gallon, in some places even higher. So maybe now this example is a little bit more reasonable, but let's say it's a normal world and gas is not going crazy in prices. My car cannot fit $185 of gas, a little four-door sedan. There's no way. So that leads me to believe that this is actually more than one expense type in one transaction. So we went to the gas station, but we bought more than gas. So if you ever need to break up your expenses in online banking, that is where you can click on the transaction like we did here. And that is where we can actually split it. So we can split expenses from within our QuickBooks Online Banking Center, which is really nice. You don't have to go out of this window and go somewhere else to do it. I can plug in the vendor just like normal. I actually do have Chin's Gas and Oil plugged in, but notice how it didn't bring it in. Again, QuickBooks Online Banking Center is not perfect. It will try to learn as best as it can. Now I can tell QuickBooks how much of this is actually fuel. This is my fuel expense account. And I can say that of this, $85 was the fuel. The rest of it was food and snacks and treats that we bought at the restaurant inside of the gas station. So I'm actually going to code the other remaining part to my travel meals. And notice how it helps you with the math right here. So if you're like me and you don't like numbers, even though you do like accounting, then it tells you the math right there. So it tells me I've already allocated $85. There's $100 left of this particular expense. So the remaining amount went for travel meals. You can add in additional lines if you need. You can reset this if you want to start over, include a memo and an attachment just like normal. And so once I have this broken up how I would like, I can go ahead, apply the split, and accept the transaction into my register. If I click my magnifying glass up top, I get to see my recent transactions. So this is that expense right here that I just brought in for $185. If I click on it and open it, it will show me that I actually was able to break this up successfully. The one transaction was for 185, but on my profit and loss report in my expense section, I was able to break this out so I can truly understand how much I spent on fuel versus how much I spent on travel meals. So that is how you split your transactions if you have more than one expense involved. Now, let's deal with these pesky matches that are still in here because there are quite a few more of them than there are of ads. So we have a lot of matches that come in. Again, we said that these are transactions where we had a downloaded transaction come in and QuickBooks was able to find a manually recorded transaction that we already did to match it to. Now, of course, you always want to double check that these matches are correct. You definitely want to see, okay, is it finding the right ones? Usually when it's a match, it means it just found one. Again, a view is whenever it finds more than one. So we're going to assume that these matches are correct. And I want a quick and easy way to bring in multiple transactions at once. So I want to show you a couple of other filters that you have as options here in online banking. So over here we have where we can filter down by date. So that's really nice. But one thing we also can do is filter down by the transactions. So right now we're looking at all the transactions, but you can filter down to the recognized, matched, transferred, rules, ones that are missing payees or customers or unassigned. In this case, I'm going to switch over to the recognized filter. And what this does, so these matches are also considered recognized. If I had other transactions that we brought in as matches, I'll find them here as well. The reason why I want to show you this is because I want to show you how you can actually bring in multiple transactions at once, speeding up this process even further. And so what I can do is if I can check these all, I can check these off and hit accept up here, or I can one by one hit match. But if I want to bulk bring them in, I can click this little checkbox in the top left. It's going to check off everything that shows in this window. It even tells me what the math is for the over under. And then I can accept those. So I just in bulk brought in all 8 of those transactions by matching them. Again, they are not gone forever. All I've done, and the other transactions are not missing either. All I've done is filtered it down to recognized, matched and brought in all of those in one. I exit out and all I'm left with are the ads, credit card payment, and a transfer. but those are all found, all those matches are all here under categorized. So this list gets bigger as we work our banking center. So if we ever need to undo it, again, those are all right here. So we can continue on. So we talked about excluding. The reason why, we talked about recognizing and matching. The reason why we do that again is because it's already there. It does not record it twice. Now, some transactions that we get into online banking, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, some of the transactions may not need to be included for our reconciliation. So some of the downloaded transactions may not need to be included. What I mean by that is sometimes we can get duplicates. So for example, a lot of times we have seen with people that migrate from desktop to online is that sometimes transactions come in that you already have on your register or that you have already reconciled. So sometimes duplicates can come in when you leave desktop and then get set up into QuickBooks Online. Or sometimes you set a date for when you want QuickBooks to bring in those transactions. We could say the beginning of the year, so January 1st. And sometimes it still does end up grabbing some transactions from some days before then. So if you don't need a downloaded transaction for your reconciliation, you actually can exclude it from QuickBooks. And so I'm going to show you how to actually exclude that. I'm going to reorganize these remaining 7 transactions by the date, and I'm actually doing my books from the start of 2022. But if I look here, I actually see this transaction from 2021 in December. I do not need to account for that. That's still in my desktop file. I am not doing 2021 in this QuickBooks Online account. So what do? Do I freak out? Do I add it? Go add it then delete it? No. You do not have to bring things in because, again, think of online banking as a waiting room. It's just waiting for you to tell QuickBooks what to do with it. So if I don't need this, just like we did with the recognized, I can check this off and I can actually choose to exclude it. It excludes it from my online banking center and it goes over here under the excluded tab as opposed to the categorized tab. Just in case I ever did need to undo it if I excluded it by accident. Doesn't delete the transaction because it did ultimately come into the window, but it moves it out of your for review tab. So it's not bugging you and telling you that you have actions to take in your banking center. So exclude any duplicates that you see come in whenever you set up your QuickBooks Online account for the first time. Again, you've already had it accounted for and you don't need it for your reconciliations in online. Exclude that, take it out. But ultimately, if you do need it for your register, then add, match, or transfer, whatever it is that actually needs to take place. And I will show you, again, I mentioned earlier that you will see duplicates when they get downloaded. If you can exclude everything, you also can, one thing I want to point out is you cannot match a transaction if it's already reconciled in QuickBooks. So if it comes into QBO as reconciled already, and you try to do something with that transaction, it's not going to find transactions we already reconciled. And you can check the reconciliation status of that transaction on the register. And I will show you how to use the register at the end of the course in just a little bit here. Just a handful of transactions left before we pop over into the reconciliation. And so one thing I want to point out is what happens in QBO whenever the owner makes a personal purchase with the business account. Now, it is tempting to want to exclude those transactions where maybe the business card was used for a purchase, or some of us are like equity account, which is correct. We actually do need to include these transactions for our reconciliation, even if it was by accident. It was ultimately money still spent on the business card, and it is going to be on our bank statement. So in this case, we went to the Cheesecake Factory. It looks like the owner went out to eat for lunch and forgot to use the personal card, or he chose to use it. That's fine as well. So what I could do is I could add Cheesecake Factory as a vendor, but we're not going to go to Cheesecake Factory often, so I don't want to clog up my vendor profile. So I'm going to create a catch-all call to restaurants that I use anytime I have these one-off restaurant purchases or expenses, things of that sort. That way I don't make my vendor list super long, but you can choose how you want to track that. And then rather than meals, it's at the regular expense account, because this was related to the owner, I actually want to use my owner's draw equity account. That way we point it correctly on our balance sheet. So this comes out of owner's draw because any of these is associated with the owner, and I would go ahead and add this. Then you just continue working your online banking center, going through transaction by transaction. So I'm going to add a couple more of these just to kind of fill these in, and then we'll talk about the last few transactions in here before we transition into our reconciliation. So I'm just going to bring these in. So Mahoney's mugs. So again, this one's not correct. It's not meals. I actually went and bought office supplies from them. So you just update the information from what QuickBooks guesses. Books by Betsy, I have a receipt here. It actually was not office supplies. It was bookkeeping. So I paid Books by Betsy $55 to do some bookkeeping for us. And then I go ahead and add that. So you see here, you're just updating the categories, adding in the additional details that are missing from this window, and then bringing them into your register from online banking rather than having to manually add these in. Tim's Philip Masonry looks like, yep, it was materials, so that one is good to go. So now we're down to our last two transactions in the checking account. Let's talk about credit card accounts because we do have a MasterCard payment transaction right here. Basically, we paid the MasterCard off with the checking account, but there are other transactions in the MasterCard that we can work to reconcile in this account as well. So you can connect bank accounts and credit card accounts. You want to reconcile both. So in this account, we have 6 transactions. So just like with the checking account, we want to check that the downloaded transaction has the right information before adding. So I'm going to go through some of these as well. So right here, we see Hicks Hardware. Hicks Hardware was materials. I have a receipt for it. Beautiful. I'm going to add that in. Then I have Hall Properties. I look at my real world records and I'm like, yes, I did have a rent charge on there for $120. So this is good to go. I am going to go ahead and add that one as well. Mahoney's mugs, I look at my receipts and actually this was money received back, but this was not for inventory. This was a refund I got on my credit card for some office supplies with Mahoney's mugs, according to my imaginary receipts. So I'm going to go ahead and do office supplies on that one and hit, again, we're just updating them to what actually happened in the real world. Then I have a Bob's Burger Joint. We're missing a vendor here. They are actually on our list. So I'll go ahead and plug that in. And this was actually travel meals. Again, sometimes we have to just update them to their specific account. Add that one in. This one down here, MasterCard finance charges. So when I have credit card, more than likely I'm going to get some kind of credit card fees, whether it's for maintenance or making a certain type of purchase. So looking at my banks or looking at my records, I see that, yeah, I did have $7.58 in fees with MasterCard. So in that case, the vendor is going to be MasterCard because that is who I paid the fees to. My category is going to then be my credit card fees account. And I'll hit add. Now we're down to just a handful of transactions left. Now, the reason why I want to do this is because once again, I'm going to go ahead and open up my chart of accounts. I'm going to right click on the chart of accounts and open this link in a new tab because I want to take a look at our balances here. So our checking account is where we normally pay our bills out of. Our MasterCard account is going to be its own credit card type account. And we see these arrows because it's connected. This is my QuickBooks balance, and this is my bank balance currently. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is paying off this balance. So we should see this lower, and the money is going to come out of checking. So our checking account will also lower by that same payment amount. We just want to make sure we point the money in the right direction. Whenever I go back into my online banking, I prefer to start in the account where the money originated from. But what's nice about QuickBooks, if you see right here, it says paired to another transaction. What that means is that QuickBooks has recognized right here that the MasterCard account received a payment of the same amount that we left or we paid out of the checking account. So QuickBooks is trying to pair these together. So what's nice is I only have to bring this transaction in once. So I tell QuickBooks, I did in fact pay off. And what it means, again, just to point it out, that over here under my MasterCard, this is the other half of it. So it recognized that the MasterCard account received money. So that's why it says paired. So you can go either direction. I'm just going to do it from here. So whenever I open this up, I'm going to plug in the vendor, and the vendor again is MasterCard. That is who I paid the balance to. And then I'll select the credit card that I paid off. And in this case, it is also MasterCard. I'm going to leave these transactions paired so that it brings them both in. So whenever I add this credit card payment, it brings it in here. And when I go over here, now this one is all set. I'm going to hit the refresh button because that number 1 doesn't ever disappear unless I refresh. But that is how you'll bring in credit card payments. You will not record credit card payments as transfers because you are actually paying off a balance. That is a common misconception in the online banking. So for those of you guys that are really good about categorizing your transaction in desktop, If you remember nothing else, never transfer a credit card payment. You do a credit card payment right here, or like you saw, it brought in automatically. Now, this last transaction that we have in here to clear out our checking account is a transfer to savings. We haven't touched transfers just yet. This is a perfect example. I am simply moving money out of checking into my savings, and we see the money hitting the savings account over here on the savings account side. So same exact thing. It will do this with transfers as well. It has noticed that we initiated a transfer out of the checking account for $500. And so this received amount in the actual checking or the savings account is going to have the other half of it. So again, I like to start from where the money began just so I can get it from start to end. So I transferred to savings. So on this side of the transaction, it's going to let me pick transferred to. So which account did I move this money to? It's popped up that paired transaction from the savings account. So I want to keep that there so they're both brought in. You could unpair if you wanted to. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit add. So it adds it from the checking account. It records that transfer. And when I come over to savings, that one is all good to go as well. So I'm going to refresh just so you can see all the green check marks come across. And now we are all caught up. So that is how you work your online banking center. Again, you can pay your credit cards from up here under pay down credit card, or you can record them as an expense. Either is fine. Just make sure that we don't record them as transfers. Now, let's talk now about reconciliation. This should be fairly quickly because this is an example and it is what happens. Well, this is what happens when it is perfect. But do know that reconciliation actually takes quite a bit of work because we're matching what QuickBooks says to what's happening in the real world. So on my left navigation bar, I'm going to hover over accounting here. I'll scroll down just a little bit and I'm going to select Reconcile. This is how we can actually get in to start matching our bank records to our QuickBooks records. You can also get to it from your gear menu in the top right by selecting Reconcile. I'm going to go ahead and hit Get Started. So QuickBooks is going to say Reconcile like a pro, and this is what this looks like. I'll probably turn my camera on for this one just so you can see my hand gestures and how this one is. So I actually have a bank statement that I'm going to pull up. So in the real world, you either have it pulled up on one screen or you'll have it actually printed. I usually recommend printing it if you can. That way you can write all on it. Otherwise, you are fine to just have it pulled up on another screen. So essentially what's going to happen is right here, you're going to open up your bank statement. We're going to match our QuickBooks documents or QuickBooks transactions to what we have on our bank statement. And then when we match everything up, ideally we should have a successful reconciliation. So I'm going to hit Let's Do It. And on my other screen, I actually have pulled open a bank statement. So I'm going to show this to you guys. This is what a typical bank statement looks like. Let me make sure that shared the right one. Looks like it did. This is my bank statement. So you see, I downloaded this. This is my business name in the top left. We see then our opening balance, our withdrawals versus our deposits, and how we actually closed out. So on the top right, you see that this is a bank statement from January 1st to the 31st. And I'm going to need these important dates and numbers for whenever I go back to my QuickBooks account. But this right here tells me all about my bank statement. It's going to show me my deposits and credits versus any checks or payments that came out. So this is my document that I'm going to use to match up what I have in QuickBooks. So I'm going to keep this right here so that we can see our numbers. So on my QuickBooks screen, I'm going to switch back here. I'm going to basically end up plugging in this ending balance and the ending date. And then we want to check our opening balance. So our opening balance is right here. You see the $367.91.38. This is how we started January. And then this amount right here is how we ended. So whenever I go into QuickBooks, I want to say, okay, this is my ending date. And then this was my ending balance for January. And I want to double check that my starting balance is correct for my beginning balance. So whenever I switch back over to my QuickBooks account, this is where we see beginning balance. And according to my bank statement, that is perfect. That is correct. So then I look back and I say, okay, it was 381,651.08 was how we ended January. And according to my bank statement, my ending date is the 31st. Now, everyone's bank statement is different. Everyone's dates are different. Some bank statements go from the middle of the month to the another middle, goes like the 22nd to the 23rd. And so once I match this up, and you see that I can select the account right here, once I enter this in, I can hit Start Reconciling. And we're going to see some things whenever I come into this window. Whenever we come into this window, we're going to see off the bat, I'm going to close out a lot of these messages that pop up here. But we see right off the bat that we have a $29,882. I said that so wrong. $29,882.32 difference between our starting and our ending balance for January. Essentially, we're going through and we're matching up all the different payments and deposits that we received, and ultimately want the difference to be $0. But this will only happen if we do this correctly. And by this, I mean if that all the transactions I have listed here, my QuickBooks transactions, match the transactions on my bank statement. So what this looks like is that I look at my printed or my other window at my bank statement, and as soon as I see a transaction on my bank statement, I check it off here in QuickBooks. We're just going back and forth and we're matching the two. You would continue on to all of your transactions on your printed statement, and if you see it on your printed statement, you check it off in QuickBooks. So if I go back to my bank statement here, we're going to see, for example, let me switch my screen back. You'll see that on my bank statement, I have a deposit of some sort of $499.95. And this is for Alamo Foundation on the 1st. Then I'm going to go into QuickBooks and look for transactions that are like this. So when I go back over to QuickBooks, I see in here, yeah, I have the $499.95 right there. And I would do the same thing going into my check. Do I have a check for $320.32? I can go back to my QuickBooks, I can go back to my bank statement, and I see, yeah, I have the $320.32 charge. So when I go back into QuickBooks, I then check it off in QuickBooks, just like we saw. So you do that. You go back and forth between your bank statement and what's in QuickBooks in order for you to actually match up what happened in the real world with what we have in QuickBooks. So I'm going to go through and check these off. And so I'm going to keep checking. I'm just, pretending like I'm going back. Pretend this is perfect. But notice, guys are already checked off. Why is that? Essentially what happens is we do all of that work in online banking. The whole bulk of the class was us cleaning up transactions in online banking. So because we did our work there, QuickBooks has recognized that, and it does what it's called a pre-reconciliation on these transactions. These green boxes indicate that they were manually added from the bank feeds, and you can see that by hovering over it here. So they're automatically checked off. We already told QuickBooks that these are real transactions. So the ones that are left are the ones that we entered in manually. So I'm going to check all these off. Now we get really close to our difference here, and I'm actually not going to check off this last one. And the reason why I'm not going to check off this $22,000 bill payment is because according to my bank statement, it's not there. It actually didn't clear until February. So sometimes transactions have a date that falls in our range, but it's not quite there. So we'll leave it here. It'll be available for the next transaction. So everything is checked off though, but you see I still have this difference of negative $18. Well, if we look at our bank statement, everything's checked off and we have it all here. Maybe we missed something. So a lot of things can happen here. We could be missing transactions. We could have too many transactions in here that don't need to be here, like duplicates that we need to delete and kind of figure out. In my case, I start looking back at all of my transactions and I realize, I recorded something incorrectly. For example, I have this electric ink transaction and I look at my bank statement. If I switch back over here, I recorded it as $157.89. But according to my bank statement, it's actually, $175.89. So I need to adjust that. I just fat fingered the number and I wrote it incorrectly. So I'm going to switch back to my QBO and I'm actually going to make that change. So I'm going to show you how to actually make a change. Like you saw, I can actually click on these transactions in here. So I don't have to go out of this window. I can click into this box and switch those two numbers. I could change a category on here, the payee if I wanted to. I could even hit edit to open up the individual transaction overall. So I'll hit save on that. And now we see, beautiful, I have hit a difference of 0. This is ideally what our goal is whenever we are actually reconciling our banking transactions. We want to get to a difference of 0. If we cannot do that, we need to figure out what is going on, because if I left this alone, let's say I didn't adjust this and I left it as it was, and the number was actually incorrect, and I have this difference, and I don't want to figure it out. Maybe it's just a couple of cents off, a couple of dollars. I don't get to easy see it, but if I hit this drop down, I could hit finish now, and QuickBooks is going to yell at me and say, hey, you didn't reach a difference of 0. Do you really want to finish this? If you say yes, QuickBooks is going to add an adjustment for the difference that you're left with to a reconciliation discrepancy account. So it moves that out where you can continue on with your reconciliation. You'll just have an adjustment that's in there. We want to avoid that as much as possible. So do what you can to figure out your reconciliations and figure out what transactions need to be fixed before actually just forcing it. And so now that everything looks good, we got to our perfect ending balance, I can hit finish now. Once I've hit finish now, I have finished out that reconciliation. It says that I am reconciled up until the 31st, and my ending balance became the beginning balance for my next month. And I would just do the next month from there. If I need to access my QuickBooks reconciliations after the fact, I want to print out a history of it. You see over here on the right-hand side, we can go into history by account. If you want to actually see it once we finish a reconciliation, you can pick the account that you want to view it for. And this is the one that we just did. I can go ahead and print that if I want to keep a paper record of it, or I can go ahead and view the report if I want to open it up and see what we actually did to it. One thing that I do like to point out to desktop migrators, people that have used desktop and are coming into online, is that you cannot undo a reconciliation in QuickBooks without having your accountant log in and do it. You can invite yourself to your books using the free QBO accountant account and undo them from there as well. You just need to locate the button under history by account. You'll have the option in the drop down that says undo. But a regular user in QBO cannot undo the reconciliation if we needed to. I just have a couple more points here. I know we did hit the top of the hour, just need probably like 2 or 3 more minutes to show you some quick things, and then we are done. So now that we've completed our reconciliation, the last step ideally is to close our books. It's important to note that if you reconcile and then try to make changes to an invoice, you will receive a warning message asking if you're sure, because that change can affect your bank or your QuickBooks balances and throw off your future reconciliations. So if I'm going to close out and I want to actually protect those transactions, then I want to actually use this statement ending date and protect those transactions that happened before it. So I can do it by going up here into our gear menu, and then we're going to go into account and settings. Under account and settings, we can pop over to the advanced section. And in here under accounting, this top part, we can click into this top part. And if I toggle close the books, I have the ability to plug in that same closing date or the ending date that we use on our reconciliation. This is also helpful for after you file taxes. If you want to protect what you've already done, you can receive a warning whenever you try to make changes, or you can even password protect them so that you can make changes only after you've entered in the correct password. And that is how you reconcile your accounts and how you close your books. The last thing I want to show you just to kind of wrap us up here is the bank register, and just kind of how you can just a couple of quick tips and tricks on using the bank register while you're reconciling. I mentioned before that you can use this to check the reconciliation status. This is an easy way right here. So again, our register is a history of all the transactions from start to end that have happened in this account ever. So this is a way to easily see whether or not the transactions you're working with have been reconciled. So you can come into here, and to get to your register, you just go into your chart of accounts and you locate the bank account or the credit card account that you want to view the register for, and you just select view register right here. So this is that same list. There's 2 lines for each transaction. You see all the details right here, the date, the type of transaction, the payee or the account type, the memo, and the deposit or payment section. This column right here, though, where the check mark is, that is the column that lets you know the status of the reconciliation. If it is in a R status, that means it is reconciled. You don't ideally want to change that because it can throw off any of your future reconciliations, because that beginning balance for the next reconciliation will be off. We included this transaction in that balance. You can take it off and put it back on if you need to work with the transaction that we talked about earlier if it's already reconciled. Bear with me while I scroll here. I want to find you one that does not have reconciled on it. I may have to just, I'm going to flip our dates here. And so, for example, some of these are from March. These don't have anything here, which means they're on our register, but we haven't done anything with it. We haven't reconciled it. So if I click on this, I can actually make changes to a transaction here. I can actually change the status here. We really only do this is if we need to work with the transaction that we reconciled, but I need to put it back afterwards. And one thing I like to point out is that C status. You'll see a C on there, meaning it's been pre-reconciled, usually has to do with your banking transactions. So if you've brought in a transaction from online banking, but you haven't actually reconciled in the reconcile window, it will say a C status because we tentatively reconciled it. And that's how you can use your register to check that reconciliation status. My last little tip here is using this little funnel guy up here in the top left to actually search for your transactions on the register, because you can always look for things here too if you're looking for your transactions while you're doing reconciliation or while you're doing online banking. You can always use this window to filter down the register. So those are the major points that we have. We've recorded transactions through the online banking center. We cleared everything up. We've done a reconciliation, and we've talked about closing our books. And so again, now that those transactions have been brought in, they are officially on our bank statement. They are no longer in online banking. And when the next ones come in, I'll just come back here and I'll work those transactions like normal. So to wrap us up here, just to kind of give us a good solid close, a couple of transactions that we cannot bring in from online banking are going to be things like invoices, estimates, bills, vendor credits. Those are things that QuickBooks doesn't know about, or that the bank doesn't know about. So those cannot be brought in from online banking. Ones that you absolutely can bring in from online banking: expenses, transfers, credit card credits. These are things that are easily tracked in online banking. You can absolutely bring those in. Some of these are actually some sometimes notes. So payments, bill payments, bank deposits, checks. Checks, you're going to want to manually record those from the new menu first and then match them in online banking, because you cannot print or include a check number from the banking center. So you want to do that first in the new menu and then just match it up once they cash your check. Pay bills, you want to record the bill payments against the bills, and then that way you can match it up with the real world. The actual bills itself will not come through. If you pay a bill with a check, you want to do that manually first as well. Bank deposits can be brought in from online banking, but if you group together your payments or checks first, you want to do that first through the manual options and then match it last. Same thing I mentioned with checks, that you want to go through the new menu as well. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Happy QuickBooksing, and good luck in the online software as you learn a new tool. Really exciting stuff.